And so what we'd like to focus on here is share some of the rationale for the VAST goals, some of the supporting evidence of why we choose these goals and why they're good ones to pursue for all the right reasons, and then talk through examples of where there are barriers to execution, and talk through how we have helped some organizations get past those barriers or help them along so that they can meet their objectives by the end of the year and before the start of another big year. So go ahead and flip to the next slide, Tom, if you would. Okay, so yeah, so you should see a slide now that says the Time Crunch Safety Manager. So I'm imagining that a lot of folks, that resonates with a lot of folks that are listening and watching our webinar today. This has become the new normal. The reality is that while the freight industry had a recession, there were a number of resources that were removed from different organizations or moved around, or mergers and so forth. Some of these activities, many of these activities occurring during the recession leading up to 2011 when things started to turn around. But during that entire phase, whether a organization shed resources or merged with other organizations, there was the net effect of shrinking capacity and resources available to deliver freight, for one thing, a severe shortage of drivers, but also reduction in resources to be able to maintain equipment and to actually manage the organization. The new normal now is, and again, I believe many safety managers can relate to this, is that even though we're past that recession and the freight picked up after 2011, and yes, there are peaks and valleys in freight volumes today, the truth is that when the industry started to turn a corner and return to profitability, that didn't necessarily mean that organizations staffed back up. It became a how much can we do with less. And so this new normal is a manager wearing many, many hats and frankly burdened with a lot of decision making, a lot of need to research solutions, a need to integrate with various parts of the organization that maybe they didn't have to integrate with before, and the whole time still dealing with the fundamental continued issues continuing to plague the industry today in terms of driver shortages. One of these major decision points that managers need to make is to either build things in-house or buy in order to build their safety cultures. And in the absence of resources available in-house, more and more organizations are finding ways to work with outside vendors and providers to help them continue traction and momentum in building their safety cultures and make no compromises there that otherwise would happen if they had to rely on their internal resources, which of course are shrinking. So somewhere here, there's a need to strike a balance between safety and productivity, achieving our safety aims, our safety goals and objectives, and continuing to see improvements in loss prevention, but at the same time ensuring that whatever capacity we have with our office associates, our warehouse associates, our driver associates, we still need to get as much as we can out of the relatively lower staff levels that we have today. So a lot for safety managers to juggle. We see that every day. We hear it. We understand that. We embrace it. And from a prior company that I've worked for, I can certainly relate to this phenomenon. Tom, please flip to the next slide. Okay, so in summary, what we see when we talk to organizations about where they are today, where they want to be, there's no shortage of great ideas, big ideas, vast ideas. There's no shortage of those wonderful ideas, often coming from networking meetings, conferences, advertising, rules and regulation making. So there's lots of big ideas which formulate into big strategies, big goals. Unfortunately, what we see firsthand is that the year starts out with wonderful goals, and then, but ironically, by mid-year or so, there's this sense of half-assed execution. There seems to be a real issue with what we call an execution gap, a gap between where those ideas are and a safety manager and their team actually able to execute against them. And so some of that is, of course, tied to resource limitations. And to continue to make the case for why we want to hang on to the big goals, why that's important, we're going to talk through a few of the industry stats that are fueling the need for these big goals and big strategies to solve. So this next slide here is a snapshot of crashes, two trend lines in reverse of one another. One is crashes going down, which would be your red line here, and indicates fatalities per 100 million miles. So in general, the industry has been ratcheting down on crashes, which is a great thing, right? And that's been recognized by DOT, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, NHTSA, in various studies. That this trending has been good. Now there have been a couple of upticks in the last couple of years, but on the whole, the industry is doing a good job. So that's great. That's a pat on the back for any safety manager in the industry, knowing that they're doing good things. There is a positive impact on the driver. However, in reverse of that positive trend of going down, we have continued cost of litigation and claims going up. So regardless of the fact that we have the overall industry effect of crashes going down and incidents going down, claims, less events happening, less bad things happening to good people, there is a relative increase and frankly an accelerated increase of cost for claims and cost of litigation that's challenging that trend. What the big takeaway from this chart really is something that I'm sure everyone listening understands, that it's really, no matter how well your organization is doing in terms of your loss prevention numbers and workman's comp numbers and reduction in injuries and accidents, there's always room for improvement, and B, never an opportunity to settle, because even just a few significant events, because of the cost of litigation and claims, can turn you from being in the black 1 year to going into the red pretty quickly. So no organization can really take that for granted just because of that accelerated cost. So it's unsustainable to really allow any level of crashes to continue. There's always room for continuous improvement. Next slide, please. And so when we're looking at these major goals that we set out to do, a familiar pattern is, how do we get underneath incidents and accidents? How do we impact driver performance in a positive way to create that continuous improvement effect? And organizations are getting smart. They're looking at the research. They're understanding that nearly 90% of incidents and accidents is directly tied to the person driving, the driver performance. And no amount of speed of technology advance in automation of vehicles and self-driving cars, and that's kind of the latest thing, latest future trend to look at, that's not moving fast enough for us to really address this issue in a big way yet. That technology is out probably at least 15 years, 20 years before it becomes practical across the board. In some pilot experimentations, there seems to be a definite impact and improvement in driver performance, but we can't wait for technology to help us or save us in every situation. So that being said, what we do need, or where we can gain some ground, is a continued focus on driver performance, and specifically looking at the quality of decisions that drivers make behind the wheel, helping them identify hazards, differentiating different hazards in their environment, recognizing the situation, and acting in such a way to avoid the crash. That continues to be the theme in terms of addressing incidents and crashes on the road caused by drivers, and also, a means to move the lever, if you will, on not just what are deemed DOT preventable crashes, but also improving performance in areas where drivers may have a hand in some non-preventable situations as well. Next slide, please. This next slide should feel familiar to those listening who have responsibility and increasing scope to their responsibility. as safety managers, where they need to work in an integrated way with the driver management operations team, driver training, driver recruitment. All of these areas come to bear in terms of claims, audits, and litigation. So anyone who's listening who has been on the hot seat, if you will, during a claims dispute or in a deposition, a litigation claim of any kind, can relate to the fact that an organization's exposure to punitive damages is directly tied to that organization's processes and people, and in some cases technology used relative to the recruitment of drivers, the training of drivers, and the management of drivers. And so punitive damages essentially are assigned if there's a pattern of negligence on the carrier's part if found anywhere. So, and which all is discoverable, of course, in the case of a major incident or major litigation. So, as safety managers, again, it's not enough to set goals for reducing crashes or workman's comp claims, or to implement, a program specific to, one aspect of driver safety. It's important to be thoughtful and to work in conjunction with your teammates across the aisle or across the organization that are responsible for driver recruitment, driver training, and driver management for no other reason than to help guard the organization from potential punitive damages. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to run through just a few of the common industry-wide needs, and we've broken these out by what we hear as far as urgent, chronic, and then emerging. And many of these will feel familiar to you. And again, they do pop on the radar as vast goals, vast ambitions in terms of getting our organizations under and seeing a reduction and improvement in, because they are chronic issues and continue to be high-cost areas of concern. Top of the list, of course, is reducing crash rate and the overall cost, which falls in the safety space. Well, our listeners certainly know and understand this one. And we also have an understanding of the cost of regulatory compliance. The speed of compliance is an issue, making sure that our organizations are in compliance on timeline or before time required, and then managing the cost of that compliance continues to be a concern. And because there are so many, over 10,000 regulations coming online before the current administration is out of office, that's a concern. Not all of those, of course, are DOT, but many of them do impact us one way or another. So having a handle on all the regulations required and being in compliance is top of mind. An emerging area that's tied to driver turnover, which is the last item here, is the shop technician turnover. In many organizations, the technician issue, or having the availability of technicians to work on equipment, is as bad or worse than the driver pool situation. So there is a urgent growing issue, quickly growing in many organizations and across the industry, an eye on reducing shop technician turnover, looking for ways to reduce the training time to build up the technician capability, recognizing that capacity is reducing. Tied to this, more on the driver side, is reducing driver training cycle time, managing instructor overhead, so that for new drivers coming into our organizations, and for many organizations they're facing high turnover rates, and there's a shrinking pool of experienced drivers to hire from. So that usually means that it's a longer training cycle time to get a new hire up to speed, somebody who's an inexperienced CDL holding driver. And so there's a constant concern about how do we manage those costs to get that driver prepared, ready, make them as productive as soon as we can, at the same time not sacrificing safety. And then lastly, of course, increasing driver retention is real big. It's no secret that the driver turnover rate is ratcheting for some organizations over 100%, and at best for the best organizations, it still hovers at the 50% level, and that's unsustainable over time. That just means a high cost to replace drivers, train them. So wise organizations are putting campaigns, vast goals in place to see what they can do to increase the driver retention. Next slide, please. So that is what we hear as urgent issues, as chronic problems that seem to be just out there all the time. We do again see the reduction in the crash rate and cost, regulatory compliance, improving fuel MPG. Now we had a drop in diesel fuel prices. There's been an uptick recently in diesel fuel prices, but looking for ways to optimize fuel and achieve the best MPG still is an overall concern for an organization, managing their cost, reducing maintenance cost as well, and improving the productivity of the drivers and the technicians. Mentioning here again, reducing the shop technician turnover. Now that's risen to more of an urgent issue for some organizations, but this is becoming a chronic issue, the lack of technicians in the field. Increasing driver retention, reducing turnover, and consistent problems as well tend to be in the reducing the CSA, compliance, safety, and accountability scores related to any violations, fines, or notification of audit for organizations. So even though there's been a pullback on visibility to CSA scores, organizations are smart to keep an eye on their CSA scores, their driver CSA scores, and make sure that they're within an acceptable range, continue to trend down if at all possible. When CSA becomes visible again, no organization wants to see that they pop up to the top or have a negative fleet number, as that can lead to DOT actions down the road. Next slide, please. And some emerging problems coming on the scene are reducing the driver training cycle time, managing the instructor overhead again. This is because we have a turnstile effect with driver turnover, new hires coming on, less experienced drivers require more hands-on, more out over the road with experienced drivers, more intensive training. So ways to reduce that driver training cycle time so that a driver can be productive and there's a return on investment to organizations is emerging. Again, as a primary issue, the need to improve new hire screening, looking for ways to help vet out drivers in accordance with new regulations, but also to ensure that you're not just that you're hiring a quality driver, a productive driver wherever possible, but making sure that they're the safest driver possible. Reversion to ELDT. ELDT here means the entry-level driver training program. Some people may be aware of this news out in terms of a anticipated regulation by the end of this year that it is basically outlines a full, more robust entry-level driver training program. The net impact is that there are hours attached to the training and a minimum of 30 hours behind the wheel time per student in a training setting. And I have reversion to ELDT here in that during the recession period, many carriers and in some cases schools collapsed their entry-level driver training programs in an effort to save money. And it made sense when there was soft freight, shrinking freight, less need for drivers, an experienced driver pool that was that could be hired from. So that worked for a while. But really, in reality, the driver shortage situation has been in place for a long time, and the entry-level driver training is becoming is rising as a concern, not just because of the regulation, but because the industry having a lack of quality drivers is going to push many organizations back to carrier-based CDL-style training schools, or and at the very least will certainly challenge existing CDL schools to meet the regulations. Those regulations, in fact, are going to probably close the door, shutter the door on several training organizations that exist today. What that means to the industry is even fewer drivers. The new hire inexperienced driver pool is directly related to the availability of training schools and the availability of CDL examiners to test, for students to test out and obtain their CDL. So, you know, one means of coping with this is for carriers and schools to address how to get into compliance with entry-level driver training, how to have a program in place that qualifies individuals and seamlessly works them through the new training process and expected level of curriculum requirements for that school, and at the same time help the organization meet its capacity demands. It's going to be very challenging, very interesting next year. Lastly, electronic logging device training. We have the ELD mandate for organizations adopting this technology, which is due in December 2017. And so one of the emerging needs that we see is certainly the adoption of the devices, getting them implemented into the trucks and equipment. But also there's a level of training concern, and we added here not just ELD, but also any other safety instrumentation like collision mitigation warning systems, lane departure warning, rollover prevention systems, in-cab cameras, and so forth. A number of different safety technologies out there. There's an emerging need to train drivers, experienced or new drivers, on how to use this equipment. That these devices, the technology, whether it's safety devices or it's ELD device designed to track on hours of service, are not necessarily intuitive enough that drivers just know how to use the device, turn it on, use it, and react to the different signals that the devices give. And so there's been, in fact, there's been some crashes experienced across the industry where drivers, for example, in the collision mitigation device, have actually run into the back of other vehicles because they didn't know how to respond to the warning signals on the collision mitigation system that was installed in their truck. And it actually led to the very accident it was designed to help avoid. And part of that is connected to the fact the driver was never trained on how to use the device or how to, importantly, react to signals, audible signals or visual signals on the device, and reacted inappropriately and did something that they didn't need to do. In other words, they looked away, looked away from the road to try to deal with the device, to turn it off or what have you, and caused an accident. So an emerging area here as we continue to add devices to our vehicles, to our equipment, is paying attention to the training that the drivers need to have to make sure that they fully understand how to use that device safely and productively. Next slide, please.
All right, this is a survey, and so everybody hold on to their hats. I'm going to try to launch a poll that everybody who is participating can click on and answer. Oh boy, hopefully that worked. Everybody seeing that poll? You can go ahead and click an answer, and then looks like everybody's clicking. Great. We'll leave this up here for just another minute or two, or really another 20 seconds or so. Then I will share the results and let Laura talk.
Yeah, so this is interesting. We've talked about chronic pain points, if you will, in the industry, emerging issues, immediate issues, urgent issues. It'll be interesting to see what our group here has to say. Okay, I see poll results. Do other people see them?
I see them.
Okay. All right. So we have so our highest vote getters here is recruiting drivers and technicians, nearly 30%, rolling out new technologies, nearly 30%. And in third place, we have reducing crashes and injuries. So interesting. So and then to a lesser degree, tied at 10%, reducing driver turnover and compliance with new regulations. So yeah, this certainly seems like these would be top issues, and this is certainly consistent with what we hear from clients. Okay, Tom. ready to go to the next slide here. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about what we see in terms of how safety programs fail, and these are basically the don't do these things. So if you're starting out with vast goals and big expectations for the year and don't want to end up in a half-vast space, here's some things to see that you've got hemmed in or addressed so that you can avoid failure. And this is based on working with small fleets, medium-sized fleets, large fleets, mega fleets, private fleets, over-the-road fleets, utility fleets, public service fleets. So this is from a host of working with a variety of different organizations, wherever they have drivers in place and an organization that needs to manage the operation of moving freight or product from point A to point B. We see a common denominator of how programs fail. So the best laid plans can fail based on the following. Starting right out of the gate is no top-down support or a lack of leadership, a lack of vision, a leadership level not embracing a vision for safety, not having that top-down support. Most organizations or programs will fail with whatever safety initiative it is. It doesn't matter what kind of safety initiative it is. That's a common denominator. No top-down support, likely to fail. And along with that, closely tied, is the lack of buy-in. It takes top-down leadership to achieve buy-in at different levels of the organization. If you don't have buy-in at the middle management level of your organization and across or integrated across departments, it's not likely you're going to have that buy-in cascade down to the front line, which is where the work is executed, at the office associate, warehouse associate, driver level. And so you need all different levels of the organization buying in order for work to change or behavior to change. Another way that we see programs fail is a lack of focus, trying to do too many things. So, look at your own organization and say, well, how many things are being trying to be fixed here? How many safety goals do I have, or productivity goals are in the mix or in the blender? And often having too many things leads directly to failure as well. And it makes sense. You just simply cannot have a big plate of things to do and expect them all to execute well. And again, this is related and tied to an execution gap. Maybe you'll get a start on a few things, a strong start, and maybe some progress, but inevitably you'll see something fall off the plate and not do so well, or not much will get done. So either way, you might have some things succeed, some not, but you don't want to have things fall off the plate. All of the goals that your organization's pursuing, especially in light of the various issues everyone's facing, are worthwhile. But try to limit your focus down to the critical few that will make a difference. The build versus buy is an area where some organizations fail. In spite of having too many hats, so the safety managers, operations managers may still insist on trying to do everything in-house with their own limited and diminishing resources, try to build everything in-house because of a sense of they want it to do it their way, or customize it, if you will. There are times, especially with several safety initiatives involving technology, where it really makes sense to work with some outside partners who can come in for a part or throughout the duration of an entire project to help you succeed. If you don't have the expertise in-house, then it makes sense to look outside the organization to buy what you need outside the organization to get the job done. Yes, it may appear that you pay more when you go outside, but if you netted it out, if you pencil it out, in the end, you probably are buying something for less, a service or product for less than if you try to build it in-house. No results tracking. Many safety initiatives are undertaken without any actual data collection and tracking back to any improvement or non-improvement directly back to the initiative. That lack of results really creates a circle back up to the top to no top-down support. Usually your chief executive officers, your CFO, they're looking for those results. That's the language they understand. So it's difficult to support an ROI discussion when there's no results tracking in place. And if you're running a program, even if it's a small pilot level, it's worthy of taking measure, using the data that you have to be able to build that consensus and that buy-in that's so critical for success in any program. Poor execution, and this is actually tied to several of these other bullets, but especially a lack of focus. Trying to do too many things, something's going to slip off the plate and just leads to poor execution. And that poor execution, unfortunately, can impact your leadership's willingness to support the next safety initiative. If one project fails, they're not likely to support you on a different safety initiative or something for next year. So we don't want to have poor execution, but unfortunately having too many things to do and not a strong focus leads to poor execution. And in summary, all of the above could really be summarized as a breakdown in people, process, or technology, which are all the three components you need to achieve success in your safety programs. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's just a list. This is not all-inclusive, but this is just a short list of very popular start-of-year goals and ideas and objectives that many organizations start with. So we have the ELD mandate top of mind for organizations to get into compliance sooner rather than later, of course. Driver scorecards, a lot of talk in the industry about different products for driver scorecards, different ways to use the data. Manager skill sets is a popular area of interest these days, especially since there's a recognition that there's a shortage of good quality frontline managers and a turnover factor with frontline managers. And so just as there's a need for quality training programs for drivers and also a program for driver technicians, there is now an emerging need for manager skills to make sure that managers are managing their drivers well. Also in the mix, that seems popular at least this year, and I would expect it to continue to be popular, safety incentive programs, ways to incent and reward drivers for top performance in safety and productivity. And then lastly, policy and procedure adoption. This is tied to new government rules and regulations, and of course organizations have their own take on rules and regs and always have the opportunity to create policies that exceed DOT or OSHA requirements. And so one of the big challenges that becomes a big goal for organizations is to write policies and procedures and make sure that they're adopted across the organization. Especially challenging for organizations that have operating units around the country or across different regions, or if there's an acquisition situation, that can be its own challenge right there, just getting adoption and alignment with different parts of the organization. So again, not an all-inclusive list, but a very popular list of programs underway by many companies. Next slide, please.
Laura, just a quick time check. We're at about 10:37. Do we want to jump through a few of these to get to some of the anecdotal sort of the major issues of the slides that we just talked about there?
I think we'll be okay. We'll just go through these couple of survey results for the group, and then we'll be able to move on. Yep. Okay. So what Tom has on screen here is the pre-webinar survey results. We just wanted to share how people voted. Most urgent problems facing your fleet. So on the earlier slide, asking about pain points, one of the top vote getters was adopting new technology, implementing technology. So that seems pretty consistent with this pre-webinar with the ELD mandate and other regulations. And then secondly, we have too many demands. So not a surprise there. Everyone is feeling stretched and feels like there's more and more added to their plate and less time in the day to accomplish, or less time in the year to accomplish their goals. Next slide, please. This was another pre-webinar survey. We just wanted to share this result. I think this is interesting to share in that this question asks, how often do you present return on investment data to management? We talked about the need for top-down leadership, and for that leadership message and support to cascade through your organization to actually see success with your safety programs. And communicating ROI is really key to getting the attention of your leadership and getting their support. So only 45% of the folks responding to this webinar said frequently, or very frequently, that they provide ROI data to management. And then 45%, this is concerning to me, 45% said not very, meaning I presume not very much or little at all. And a small sliver of people are annually. So at least we have 55% that are reporting it, but this 45% that isn't is concerning, because that does affect your ability to get support for your safety programs and enough support and resources to sustain progress and close the execution gap. Next slide, please. So we're going to just talk about a couple of these popular projects and share what Thomas said, some anecdotal information around barriers to execution and best practices to overcome and eliminate the potential for an execution gap. And we're not going to turn this into an ELD mandate presentation, obviously. All of the providers and consultants out there on adopting electronic logging have their own seminars to attend. You can learn a lot by signing up and listening to the hardware and software experts out there to get some ideas. But we do want to focus on the execution of this project. So everyone who has been delving into this is aware, I'm sure, with the regulation and the timeline of December 2017 for any new carrier coming on with adoption of the equipment to meet compliance requirements. So December 2019 is the date for companies already utilizing in-cab devices to track hours of service and other data in order to meet the new Federal Motor Carrier safety requirements. So there's a variety of options, which is nice. As this issue has matured, there's hardware-centric or mobile devices available, many options, more than were available when I had to address this issue with the fleet that I supported years ago. The chief reason, of course, for the adoption of the ELD mandate is the hours of service compliance. It is a huge boon to reduce cost, time, and pain of logbook keeping. So for all the right reasons, the ELD mandate is a good thing, but it does put pressure on our organizations in terms of cost and execution. The actual barriers to execution, here's what we see. Here's what we hear, what we see as far as what can go wrong. A big area, again, I mentioned it earlier with adoption of really any technology, ELD or any safety technology added to a truck or to the system supporting the operation of the truck is end user adoption, and that simply means the driver. We cannot assume that drivers see this device and just know how to use them. It's enough to get them in a space to understand why that's being used, but it's an entirely different issue to actually have them be able to use the device and use it correctly to obtain the results you're expecting to see. I cannot overstate for you how important end user adoption is. If end user adoption is not factored into your game plan or strategy for implementing ELD technology, you're going to have some real struggles in terms of the devices being used correctly. That's going to impact the data that you're receiving. But you need to have a certain level of driver acceptance and driver comfort level in using the technology to get the net gain. The second area that becomes a barrier to execution and can impact the success of your program and your implementation is factoring in the technology integrations, meaning this is not designed to be, although some providers will treat it like it can be, that it's a standalone solution, but that's not the best way to implement this technology. Wherever possible, you want to have the technology integrated with your transportation management system. Perhaps it's integrated with fuel management, with CSA scorekeeping, or DOT data-driven systems, maybe even a learning management system, because you can pipe training through these devices as well. Factoring in the different technology integrations is important, and the reason for that is you want to get as much ROI out of this requirement as you can. So what we see dropping down to best practices is that you don't want to obviously be waiting till the last minute to implement. I think people on the call would understand that's not smart, not wise. You want to start immediately building ROI with these devices as soon as you can, and there is ROI in it. It isn't just a cost proposition to implement ELD because it's a DOT requirement. There is an ROI behind it, and you know, your organization can take advantage of that. You could ROI like slashing the fuel costs, reducing paperwork, improving driver communication, charging for detention time. Other value adds is it reduces the cost of communication in many cases. If you're previously working on off of satellite communications, you can sharply reduce the cost of communications by using these new devices. I mentioned training before. You can pipe training to many of these devices. That helps reduce time in training. Drivers like that. Making life easier in general for your drivers and letting them focus on driving and not driver logs. That's always appreciated by drivers. We talked before about the need to retain drivers. It's a lot easier to retain drivers than it is to try to attract new ones to the industry. So whatever we can do to help reduce driver irritation and retain good people, not just productive drivers, but safe drivers, let's make life easier for them. And these devices will do that, but it's important to communicate the value to the driver so that you can bring them along. You can get them to agree to use the technology, that they're not negative about it or not willing to use it properly. You can bring drivers along by emphasizing what's in it for them. Leverage the available training. Many of the providers have pretty good training that's available right off the box. One of the boxes pictured is Omnitrax, the MCP 200 unit, and there's actually very good training that's embedded right on that box that will actually go like step by step through how to enter current duty status, or how to modify a logbook, and a variety of other functions that the box has. Omnitrax, Qualcomm has found a way to put some very decent training right on the box. Make use of that. And you'll want to build driver champions to help cross-train other drivers. Drivers believe and listen to other drivers. So leverage champions in your group who are excited about the technology, and allow them to help train and encourage other drivers to adopt the technology. And then lastly, in the selection of the vendor, whomever you go with, look for that broadest functionality and the capability to handshake with other systems. The last thing you need is another major IT maintenance project. So you want to look for the, you know, if you're going to inevitably have an IT effort that you'll be investing in, but you want to make sure you get as much for the dollar as you can. And fortunately, many of these systems do provide for broad functionality, but look for that, and look for the ease of connecting with other systems. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to touch real quickly on a couple of other points here, other projects that tend to be vast goals up front for an organization. Driver scorecards, very popular, lots of conversation around types of driver scorecards, how to keep data. Driver scorecards are essentially what I call a baseball card look at a driver or fleet. So you may have collected baseball cards as a kid, or maybe you still do. You know that on one side of the card, of course, you have the picture of the ball player, and then on the back side, you have all the data on that player. And even if you don't really know baseball, you could get a pretty good sense of where that player was at just looking at their score, where they were in the league. So driver scorecards are intended to be very similar. They're designed to give you that quick look at where your individual drivers are at, and how your drivers by region, or drivers by fleet type, or even nationwide, how your drivers look in sort of snapshot reports. The best driver scorecards will balance safety and productivity. They don't create a driver dyslexia effect where drivers are not sure, you know, if they're should be more focused on productivity and responsive to operations, or if they should be more responsive to safety. And ideally, the data is in one place. Some of the barriers to execution here is tied again to overall safety program failures, lack of buy-in. So if there's not a clear line of sight to how driver scorecards and the implementation of them can help save your organization costs, it can be challenging to get leadership buy-in and to sustain leadership buy-in. And it does take leadership buy-in to either purchase or develop driver scorecards in-house. The other big barrier to execution I like to point out is the absence of or inconsistent process for corrective action, having no corrective action process or plan. I have learned from my own experience, and especially working with defense attorneys who get really wrapped around the axle on data like this that can be pulled on drivers. And all this data can, of course, be pulled into discovery and used in different claims. But I have had several conversations with defense attorneys about what a driver scorecard should contain, what it should look like, what are the details they want to see. And the most consistent answer I received over the years from attorneys was, it doesn't matter what this report looks like. Now this is a nice color-charted report sample from Visualo. They pulled together a nice report. But it really, in their view, it doesn't matter what colors are on here, what specifically is being measured, how it's organized, how much detail, how little detail is on the document. So from an attorney's perspective, defense attorney, they don't particularly care about that. What they do care about is that there's nothing being done with the data, because that is the biggest liability gap for you, the safety manager, and your organization. All this data is wonderful, but it's only wonderful to the extent that you can act on it. So the biggest thing we see as far as a myth with using driver scorecards are companies getting wrapped around the axle and all excited about what it should look like and all the details and nuts and bolts of the scorecard, whether it be an outside vendor product, whether it be an in-house built spreadsheet, wherever the source is. They get more concerned about that than actually what is done when you find a gap or a problem with a driver. And so what we would encourage is that you absolutely make sure there's a corrective action plan if there's any negative data on a driver, because your liability is directly tied to that, to not doing anything with that data. So your best practices, achieve top-down buy-in by being able to tie performance to company profitability. You want to try to make this a low IT maintenance self-service effort as you can. And then actionable data, focusing on what you can actually act on. There's a lot of great data you can pull on drivers, on the equipment they drive, on individuals, on the entire fleet. There's a lot of data out there, folks, but it only matters if you can act on it. So that's what I want to leave you with here, is making sure that that data is actionable. Next slide, please. The next slide has just a quick cycle diagram of corrective action review. So consider a review process that looks like this. If you don't, ask yourself, would you feel comfortable if you had your frontline leaders using a driver scorecard? Would they know what to pick off of the card and act upon with drivers? Would they know how to deal with it? Do they know what to do if they see some negative data? What's that process? You don't have to answer it here in a poll or anything, but if you don't feel comfortable that every frontline manager managing drivers knows how to access driver scorecard data, and more importantly, they know what to do with the data and they actually do it, then this is some area, this is definitely an execution gap area. This is something you need to focus on and make sure you get corrected, because of the liability that really is that you're exposed to. So defining the problem, measuring it through the data, analyzing, and then executing an improvement plan for the driver, and then controlling some back-ended way to look to see if the driver behavior was improved. Very critical. If you don't have this and you're not confident that you have a process in place, that it's communicated to frontline managers and that they're executing against it, you definitely have a major execution gap. Next slide, please. So we're just going to touch upon a couple of more things and we'll wrap it up. So we've talked about technology, we've talked about process challenges to execution. Now we're going to talk a little bit about people as a challenge to execution. So here we have a chart that I think people are probably pretty familiar with. No surprise that we have a driver shortage. ATA recently released an economic report that showed that if we continue a pattern as we are of 70,000 short drivers this year, that by 2024 that shortage will increase or balloon to 175,000 drivers. So pretty significant, lots of negative consequences for the industry. Next slide, please. So what we want to spend a couple minutes here is talk about frontline manager skills and the importance to retaining drivers. We often think of factors that pull drivers away, such as pay and time at home, and those do continue to be factors. But it turns out from a TMW report, research report, that just as critical to a driver's decision to leave an organization is a factor known as the truck-to-manager ratio, that there is a direct correlation to effect on driver retention. And the magic number seems to be 30. If a fleet has 30 or more drivers assigned to one manager, their general turnover rates are over 75%. If they drop to 21 drivers or power units to manager, then their turnover rate is 50%, and sometimes, in most cases, actually, majority responding to that research study were less than 50%. So there is a direct correlation. And that makes sense. That means that managers have some more time, that they can have some quality relationship communication with drivers. Drivers leave their managers as much as they leave a fleet or a company. So that's not unique. People do fire their manager before a company. And it's an emerging concern is the shortage of qualified frontline managers. So barriers to execution, time, budget, training of managers. Some of the best practices we see and we'd encourage so that you can close an execution gap here is helping, we talked about this a bit earlier, training on driver key factors and scorecard metrics, helping your driver managers understand what is a behavior issue and what is a skill. Taking the time to train the manager, particularly on their management style, how to communicate and how to coach drivers. And then also analyzing the root cause of turnover. The best-in-class organizations with low turnover continually look at the root cause of turnover. They look at push and anchor factors and pull and limiting factors and then make changes as necessary so that they can close the execution gap and help improve retention of drivers by ensuring their frontline managers are prepared. Next slide, please.
All right, so we have two more quick survey questions. Do we want to do these real quick? Oops, I guess that's me. There we go. All right. Hopefully everybody is seeing that. Real quick, and if everybody can vote real quick, we'll pop through these real quick.
Good.
All right. Another 5 seconds real quick. Okay, we'll close, and then we're going to share these results.
So a lot of folks recognize with being half-vast. The year sneaks up on you, doesn't it? Before you know it, we're near the end of the year. Let's try the next time, and then we can move on and wrap up.
All right. One more poll.
So we talked about execution gaps being can be tied to people, process, or technology. So if we're addressing execution gaps, we usually can find the issues in one of these three areas, and sometimes a combination. But what do you think? When you think about where you are today, where you need to be, where do you think your execution gaps are? Okay. Clearly the majority, it's a combination of the above. So interesting too that we have some folks concerned about process and have some people gaps as well. I'm surprised not to see a technology gap, but Sounds like our crew on the call's got a good handle on that. Let's go ahead and flip to the next slide, and we'll wrap up today's session. Okay, Tom had mentioned right from the outset that here at Instructional Technologies we have had professional services available for some time. We are known for our online courseware product, ProTread, but we do have a broad bandwidth of professional service capability to provide our client base as well, to help organizations make sure that they meet their vast goals and have full execution. Next slide, please. So here are some areas, if you haven't thought about ITI maybe being a partner to help, here's some ways that we have helped clients, and we want you to consider. If you feel you need some help or support, or you're looking for a third-party objective view, we do custom courseware development. We do provide safety audits, reviewing an entire safety culture, but we also have DOT and OSHA-specific mock audit capability. We do training program consultation to look at your training programs, make sure that you have ROI from them. We do have train the trainer and train the management programs. And we also have safety reinforcement messages in addition to ProTread to help you extend the scope and reach of your safety messaging. Next slide, please. So with that, any questions from the group before we wrap up today? And thank you in advance for joining us. We hope this information was useful to you, that you picked off a few good points for yourself, and understand that we do have some resources available to help you out so you don't suffer in silence. As a safety manager, you've got some friends out there who can help you. But are there any questions from the folks on the call?
Everybody, if you want, you can type your questions into either the chat window, or there's also a questions window as part of the GoToWebinar control panel. If you want to put those questions in there, Laura, I'll fire a question to you that we got this morning. It was from a food distributor, and they were asking about any new ProTread lesson on the new Food Safety Modernization Act rules, and how ITI and our services might be able to help with that.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do have a couple of lessons in development that will be available in the fall. So the question is related to the Food Safety Modernization Act, and specifically the sanitary transportation rule as it applies to food shippers and carriers, distributors. We do have a lesson that's an overview that's suitable for shippers, loaders, carriers, and receivers of food, and it highlights all the need-to-know information relative to the new USDA rules related to food safety. And then we do have the second lesson is driver specific. So it's everything a driver needs to know. And in this case, the law impacts refrigerated drivers in the first iteration of the new rules. And so the lesson is designed for the refrigerated driver, everything they need to know procedurally to maintain the integrity of the food chain supply.
Great. And I think as it relates to professional services, I believe that started off as a custom piece of work that we were doing for some of our other clients, correct? I mean, doing a lot of custom work is a big part of the professional services offering that we have. So if people have, things that are really specific to their industry or to their business, that's the sort of thing that is very much in the wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Yeah, we have over 3,000 custom courses that we've built for clients, and the off-the-shelf courseware menu is quite large, over 100 courses, but we certainly have a lot in custom courseware. And the generation of the food safety lessons was a custom course development request. So we're pleased to be able to add the food safety lessons to our ProTread library and look for those to come out in the fall for those clients interested in those.
Quick question from the audience. The ELD that is required for local, that's required For local delivery drivers of less than 150 to 125 mile radius, is that a requirement for, is there a, I guess, intra-state requirement for the ELD?
I believe there is. I'll say it that way. I would have to look that one up, look at the specific DOT rules for intrastate. And maybe, Tom, if you can copy that over to me and I can look it up. If we know who sent that, we can get an answer back to.
We do, and I will. Another quick question regarding safety meetings with the drivers, but then also with managers. Is that a service that is available?
Yeah, absolutely. We're often asked to provide a little talk to drivers or managers to attend a safety meeting that a company has, and if they're looking for a guest speaker, someone to bring a different voice to a topic to help reinforce safety practices and procedures, and or bring some management skill training, we're often asked for that, and we do that, bring that out to clients if they're interested.
Okay, and then one last one, and then we'll let everybody go here. You mentioned mock audits in the course of the presentation earlier. What's usually involved in a mock audit, especially, I guess, a DOT audit?
Sure. So a mock audit really is where we would effectively conduct a DOT-style audit or an OSHA audit, but of course it's a mock one. It's not the real thing, but it's as close to the real audit as you can get. A DOT audit typically covers 6 factors, looking at all the required record keeping on the behalf of the DOT licensed carrier, everything from carrier responsibilities and insurance requirements, a review of DQ files, all hours of service logs, vehicle maintenance records are looked at, hazmat if that applies, reportable accident reviews. So essentially our mock auditors will actually go and do a full 6-point review to replicate what an actual DOT audit is. And the value of it is you have a third party looking at your records and giving you an objective review of how you would stack up in an actual DOT audit. And we provide a bit of a scorecard on how you scored relative to other companies in a DOT mock audit and give you specific advice on how to close the gaps. You know, if there are any errors or any issues found, we give you some very specific advice on how to shore things up so you could pass a DOT audit if it came to that.
Okay, and then I got one more. Just if somebody was interested in this, can you just kind of give people an overview of sort of like what happens over the course of, you know, working with a professional services engagement? I mean, is it very time consuming? I mean, obviously the goal is to make things easier, but what sort of happens over the course of the engagement, I guess specifically at the beginning of it? Like, so what would somebody want to do if they were interested in discussing it?
Sure, great question. So if you're interested, if any of the topics pique your interest, you have a special need some extra arms and legs to help you get work done by the end of this year, the first thing is to notify us. You can email me or call me directly. The last slide has my contact information, or email one of your customer account reps, Marlena or Jennifer. They would be happy to take the information and forward it. And I would give you a call back. We would go through needs analysis to understand what specifically you're looking for. You can we can talk through your problems or issues, and I can help you understand what might be helpful. We would scope out that work and provide a proposal to you for your consideration. And the actual work conducted really comes down to what the timeline is, what it is that you need done and what your time frame is in terms of getting something turned around. So if it's a custom course development, from the beginning to end, that generally is about a 6 to 8 week turnaround time to give people an idea of what that time frame looks like. If it is audit services or train the trainer, that's something that is scoped down into typically 1 or 2 days of on-the-ground effort, so we can turn that around more quick. Online course, obviously, it takes more time in production and so forth. So usually an on-site service or a phone consult service or developing reports for clients is something that can be done in a matter of days versus weeks.
Cool. All right. Well, those are all of the questions that we have. Laura, thank you so much. It was a really interesting presentation. I certainly learned a lot working with you to getting it done. And thank everybody for joining us today. You will get an email again with a link to the recorded webinar in case you want to share it with other people in your organization. As well, we'll also be inviting you to our next webinar where we will talk a little bit about train the trainers or training your managers and what some of those best practices are for getting those managers to be able to coach your drivers, coach your employees in a really effective way. Stay tuned for that. That'll be sometime sort of a back-to-school time. In fact, I believe that's actually what we titled it. So anyway, thanks a bunch for everybody, and we will be in touch. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.